Welcome to her remarkable history. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The Executed Women of the Tower of London. The Tower of London is known as one of the most barbaric and savage prisons and castles in history. It's considered this because of a number of high-profile executions that took place here during the Tudor period. It was even being used as a site to execute prisoners, even during the Second World War, but during the reign of King Henry VIII, the fortress was used to brutally kill a number of high-profile women. These women went to their death with defiance, bravery and sadness as their lives were cut short by either the axeman or a swordsman. There was also one other woman executed on Tower Green, the site of the scaffold during the reign of Bloody Mary I. Following their executions, they were then taken the short walk to the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where they were buried under the floor of the chapel, or in a vault there. But who were the executed women of the Tower of London? The most high profile of the women executed was a woman who caused a huge degree of change and turmoil across England. Anne Boleyn is considered by many to have been the most influential and significant queen consort that the country had ever seen, and she caused so much change during her short time on the throne. Anne, at the court of King Henry VIII, caught the attention of the monarch and he became infatuated with her, but she refused to sleep with him unless he annulled his marriage to his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Anne continued to frustrate Henry, but he eventually was forced to split from the Catholic Church in Rome, and he declared himself the head of the Church of England, out of rage as the Pope would not grant him his divorce. When Anne and Henry finally married, their partnership gave birth to a daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth I, who is considered one of England's greatest queens. But the fact she could not provide Henry VIII with the male heir and son he greatly wished for, this led Henry's eye to go wandering towards Jane Seymour. It was rumoured that Jane was pregnant whilst Henry was married to Anne, and Henry ordered one of his key advisors, Thomas Cromwell, to find him a way out of his marriage. Cromwell spun a horrific web of lies aimed at slandering Anne, and she was accused of adultery, incest and treason with 5 men, including her brother George. These 5 men were also executed, but Anne's execution was a shocking one, as she was confirmed as guilty, with even her own father and uncle agreeing on her guilt. Today she's seen as a victim of lies, but inside the Tower of London, Anne Boleyn was beheaded. On the 19th of May 1536, she was led out of her cell in the Tower of London to the site of the scaffold, which was Tower Green. She was allowed to be executed inside the tower, as she was of such noble birth, and as she was a queen. The swordsman from France was summoned to take off her head, and it was considered much more reliable than using the axe, and whilst on the scaffold it was said, she gracefully addressed the people from the scaffold with a voice somewhat overcome by weakness, but which gathered strength as she went on. She begged her hearers to forgive her if she had not used them all with becoming gentleness, and asked for their prayers. It was needless, she said, to relate why she was there, but she prayed the Judge of all of the world to have compassion on those who had condemned her, and she begged them to pray for the king, in whom she had always found great kindness, fear of God and love of his subjects. The spectators could not refrain from tears. Anne's headdress was lowered and taken off, and after saying bye to her ladies-in-waiting, she knelt as one of her ladies tied a blindfold over her eyes. She said her final words, and the swordsman approached her, showing his sword to the crowd to gasp, and then quickly he performed his office. In one bloody swing, Anne Boleyn's head was taken off. Her body was then buried in an unmarked grave inside the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, and today she rests under a marker on the marble floor before the altar. But another one of Henry VIII's queens would find herself without a head inside of the Tower of London. Henry VIII's 5th wife, Catherine Howard, was only a teenage girl when she became the Queen of England. It's believed that when she married the king in the July of 1540, that she could have been between 15 or 19 years of age. Henry at the time was 49, and their marriage was doomed from the start. Prior to marrying the king, it is believed that Catherine had a number of relationships, some inappropriate with other men, including her music teacher, Henry Manox, who it's believed groomed her. She also had a relationship with another man, Francis Derham, a secretary who worked for her step-grandmother Agnes Howard, when Catherine stayed in the care of. But when she arrived at court, her looks and her youthfulness attracted Henry VIII straight away, and he said he could have never known a woman like her, calling her the very jewel of womanhood. Catherine, though, was carefree, young and immature, and was not fit for the office of being a queen or a consort at all. Her own eye was then caught by Thomas Culpeper, one of Henry VIII's closest friends and advisers, and together the pair, it's believed, had an affair. Henry VIII was told of the encounters her and Culpeper had, and Thomas Cranmer saw this as an opportunity to topple his rivals, and it was he who informed the king of the affairs. An act of attainder was passed against Catherine, which made it possible to sentence her to death without any trial, and because of this, she was then transported to the Tower of London. As she passed on the River Thames under London Bridge, it's claimed she passed under the heads of her former lovers, Culpeper and Derham. She was held in the Tower for a short while, and it was said on the day before her execution, she spent a number of hours practicing how to lay her head on the block. Her execution was scheduled for 7 a.m. on Monday the 13th of February 1542, and it was an axe that would take her life. As she approached the scaffold, she needed some assistance to climb it, and it's claimed she died with composure before in one swift blow the executioner's axe took her head clean off. There was another woman who was executed in the scandal surrounding Catherine Howard. Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, was also beheaded shortly after Catherine. She had been implicated in the scandal surrounding Henry's fifth wife, and it was said that Jane, the wife of Anne Boleyn's executed brother, helped to facilitate meetings between Thomas Culpeper and Catherine. It was said Jane arranged these, and that the affair happened in her quarters, and that Jane knew all about it. Jane had a complete nervous breakdown the month before, and Henry VIII had to even pass a law saying he could execute someone who was declared insane if they were guilty of high treason. He passed this law with the sole intention to execute Jane Boleyn. Jane, shortly after Catherine's execution, was led to the scaffold, and it was said the wooden structure was still covered in the blood of her former mistress, and she was made to kneel in the hay covered in the blood of Catherine. In one swift swing also she was beheaded, using the axe, and her body was then buried inside the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, like Catherine's was. But the year before the scandal, Henry had also flexed his muscles further to try and solidify his claim to the throne by executing a woman who was deemed to have royal blood. Margaret Pole, the Countess of Salisbury, was the daughter of George Plantagenet, the executed brother of King Edward IV, the king who dominated the Wars of the Roses. This left her with a significant claim to the throne, and Henry saw this as threatening. Her son became a prominent Catholic cardinal, and he was seen as a threat in the wake of Henry VIII's break from Rome and the dissolution of the monasteries. Because of this, Margaret also fell under suspicion, but she was known as a woman who could hold her own. She had taken on the king before with regards to a land dispute, but in her old age she fell under suspicion. Thomas Cromwell produced false evidence against her, and she was then thrown into the Tower of London. Margaret was in her 60s when she was imprisoned inside the cold fortress, and it was said that she could be executed at the king's will. So she woke every day wondering if the day would be her last. She wrote this poem on the wall of her cell. For traitors on the block should die. I am no traitor, no, not I. My faithfulness stands fast, and so towards the block I shall not go. nor make one step, as you shall see, Christ in thy mercy save thou me. But on the morning of the 27th of May 1541, she was told she would die within the hour, but she had no idea what she had been indicted of. She was taken out of her cell, and a wooden low block had been prepared on the floor of the Tower of London's courtyard near to Tower Green. There was no customary scaffold, showing that her execution was hastily arranged. It was said that the elderly Margaret Pole went to her death defiantly, and she refused to lay her head on the block, and it was said that she moved her head a number of ways. But the executioner was a young man, who performed his job poorly, and it was said her head and shoulders were hacked to pieces. Her execution did not go to plan. There is one more woman executed inside the walls of the Tower of London, but her death came during the reign of Mary I. Lady Jane Grey grew up inside the humble yet beautiful Bradgate House, where she received one of the finest educations in Tudor England at the time. However, she was a cousin of King Edward VI, and following his health beginning to fail, he began to look for his successor. He did not want to put his half-sister Mary or Elizabeth in power, but instead turned to his strongly Protestant cousin, Jane, and she was named the next monarch. Following Edward's death, Jane was proclaimed queen, and it was noted that she did not want to become the queen. She reigned in total for 9 days before the Privy Council switched their support to the Catholic Princess Mary. Jane was then imprisoned in the Tower of London, where she had stayed awaiting initially her coronation, but it became clear to Mary that it was too dangerous to have her alive. Because of this and the threat of rebellion, Mary sanctioned Jane's execution. Before it took place, she noticed her husband leaving the Tower of London, heading to Tower Hill, and she saw his headless corpse being brought back into the tower following his beheading. But on the 12th of February 1554, Jane, who herself was roughly only 16 to 17 years of age, was brought to Tower Green and the scaffold. She allegedly confessed to unlawful actions and told the executioner that she wished to be executed quickly. She blindfolded herself, and it was said that she stared death in the face rather bravely before she then got flustered, as she could not find the block to lay her head upon. She was helped by a witness, and then one clean stroke of the axe took off her head. So throughout the Tudor period, there was a number of women who were executed and beheaded inside the walls of the Tower of London. All of these women were strong in their determinations to meet death head-on, and a couple were defiant as they believed they had done nothing wrong. To cross King Henry VIII was deemed to have been very serious, and it was something that you could pay for with your life. Today the Tower of London remains a site where 3 Queens of England were executed in brutal and shocking fashion on Tower Green, which today is a rather calm space. All of the women mentioned in this video were interred in the chapel and small church that sits behind the site of the scaffold too, and their final resting place is a short number of steps away from where their life was taken away from them. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.